Hello, everyone, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live panel on careers in AI. My name is Kelly McNeil. I'm a learning experience designer at Digital Promise, and I'm joined today by my fantastic team, which supports the Reinvent the Classroom initiative. This is a collaboration with HP, Microsoft, and Intel, celebrating powerful teaching and learning with technology. I am pleased to be here moderating a panel of innovative educators from one of our peer to peer professional learning communities, the HP Teaching Fellows. Today, we'll be talking about careers in AI. Often, when we talk or think about careers in education, one might imagine talking about the upper or high school grades. However, we all know AI is already upon us. It is important to prepare students of all ages for the workforce of today and tomorrow. As the computer scientist Alan Kay has said, the best way to invent the future is to predict it. We have an amazing panel of teachers representing work with students from kindergarten through middle school, allowing for an interesting and engaging discussion of how we might go about that. Our panel will run until 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and we invite you to listen and engage with our panelists throughout the discussion. Please use the chat to provide thoughts, questions, and to engage with each other. Our wonderful Digital Promise team will be moderating the chat and will gather your questions for us. Towards the end of the panel, we will be answering those questions as time permits. If you are having any issues typing into the chat, try and refresh your screen and it should work. Now, let's get started with introductions of our amazing panelists. Please tell us your name and location, your role, subject area, and grade level. We'll start with Sebastian.
Hi, my name is Sebastian. I work in Toronto, Canada. I teach grade 5, and I teach all subjects except for physical education.
Awesome. Next up, we have Kim.
Hi, my name is Kim Niebauer. I teach kindergarten through 5th grade, gifted. I'm from Jacksonville, Florida, and I think that's all you asked. I'm not sure.
That's great. Welcome, Kim.
Okay.
And last but not least, we have Manda.
Hi, I'm Manda Voth. I teach career and life planning and technology to junior high students, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade.
Wonderful. So, and I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. So, just for my panelists, if you all can mute when you're not speaking, that might help a little bit. Okay, so first, I'd like to ask a question for all of the panelists. Tell us a little bit about how you see your current classroom or instructional practices in the context of preparing students for careers. What sorts of skills do you feel you are building in your current practice that will help students in future skills? And what sorts of connections do you see with AI in these skills? Sebastian, we'll start with you.
So I teach grade 5, so definitely AI has been kind of a new and emerging technology that my students are becoming more and more aware and familiar with. So I have kind of 3 focuses that I think relate really well to future careers. And these are kind of skills that in my district are called global competencies, things like communication and collaboration. These skills are meant to be applicable to any sort of sector that students might want to work in the future. And so we try to foster these skills and get them to understand that these are applicable to whatever industry they might want to work in or have interest in. I think design thinking is another way that we can kind of start to foster skills that can be relevant to almost any kind of job that students might be interested in. So having solution-driven kind of processes that they can follow and apply to even like local community issues. And again, that collaboration, working together to kind of develop these solutions, I think is really important. And I think even with elementary students, getting them to build their critical thinking skills. Misinformation and disinformation is only going to be more challenging to detect and more disruptive as AI becomes more sophisticated. And so preemptively getting students to kind of know how to identify and how to break down misinformation and disinformation, I think are skills that can be extremely relevant and they are relevant right now, and in the future they're going to be even more so.
Excellent. Yeah, completely agree with that. And it's nice to hear perspective from Canada for us educators here in the United States for sure as well. Kim, how about you?
There we go. Sorry, I had to unmute. I definitely think that it's important that we continue to teach, obviously, the technical skills. Like in my class, I'm teaching coding, I'm teaching math, I'm teaching engineering design. And, AI can help us because we can ask AI to give us suggestions, give us problem sets, help us figure out maybe scenarios that the students can use in the classroom. But I also feel like it's really important that we're focusing on the soft skills, like communication, teamwork, problem solving. Flexibility is a huge one. We can't measure these skills, so we can't say like whether or not the students are, this is definitely something that they're going to have. But what we can say is that this is what a lot of employers are looking for when they are looking for people that they want to employ in different roles. And I feel like the way that AI can help us with the soft skills is by maybe in the case of my students, it can help provide like some scenarios that I can say like, okay, here's a situation where little Sally and Tommy were taking a test, and Sally saw Tommy looking at her test, and what should she do? And then we can have a discussion about what is it that Sally thought she saw Tommy doing, and how does Tommy feel? Like, is that really cheating? And just some of the different things that we can talk about in order to help them develop those soft skills. And then one final thing that I think that it can be very helpful with is that when it comes to research, I've found that it's really good to talk to my students about, I call it the art of questioning, learning how to write the question so that they get the response back that they want. A lot of people refer to this as prompt engineering, but from a research perspective, we've been doing this for a long time, where when the student types in the question and they don't get back the results, well, we talk about it. Was your question too broad? On the other hand, was it too narrow? Did you give too much information? And so those are definitely things that I think that we've got to start working on students with, even now, even at the elementary level.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, agree on soft skills. Very important. Okay. And Manda, how about you?
So one of the courses I teach directly focuses on preparing students for future careers, and that's teaching career and life planning to 8th grade students, where they explore their personalities and interests to find careers best suited for them. And I think AI has the opportunity to help students kind of narrow down those careers that are suited to them by inputting their interests and asking the AI generator what would suit them best. However, building on what Kim said, is we do have to teach them how to communicate effectively, not only with peers and employees, but with the AI generators as well, so that it effectively gives them their desired output. We also learn work ethic as well, which I think opens up an opportunity for having conversations about AI and the ethics and the use of it to complete their tasks in the workplace. When is it appropriate to use AI? When is it not? They still need to learn the soft skills, as mentioned before, such as communication with themselves. And then finally, I teach robotics and coding, in which students are able to explore AI through the different programs that we use, and from a coding perspective, and how computers gather data and generate outputs. So I think that kind of provides them with the foundation of the shift in computing careers to incorporating AI and how they could make those changes.
That's wonderful. That's great. Okay, we're going to move on to our first question. So, while we might think of this question for older, middle, or high school students, I'm very interested in what you're seeing with your younger students. What are your students current perceptions of future careers? And for the younger ones, like what sorts of ideas do you hear them talking about when they think of their future? If they're not necessarily talking about jobs or careers, what do you hear them talking about when they're talking about their future? Kim?
Yeah. So again, I teach ages around 6 to 11. So by around third grade or so, most of them have started to think about their career and what they might like to do. And of course, you have the traditional: I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm going to be a teacher. But now I'm starting to hear: I'm going to be a YouTuber, I'm going to be an influencer, I'm going to be a gamer. And so we talk about how they can do that to start with, and then also how is AI going to affect those careers. So, for example, when I have a student who says, "Well, I think I'm going to go into the field of healthcare," we talk about how AI is moving towards providing personalized treatment for patients based on the patient's records, but also their genetic profile. We talk about stuff that is already out there, but is becoming more and more relevant for these students 20 years from now when they are in their careers. So we've even started talking about jobs that don't exist yet. So, for example, what about the career of an AI ethicist or a human machine teaming manager or maybe a telesurgeon, which we know robotic surgeries already happen, but this is where the surgeon's not even in the room, maybe not even in the same country, and they're doing surgery remotely. And so when you talk about these jobs that have always existed, jobs that are now popular, like gamers and influencers, and then jobs that will someday exist, it really opens up like a whole new world for students to be able to explore their futures and what might be possible.
Yeah, I love that you are talking about AI ethics with 6 to 11-year-olds. That's just phenomenal. I love that. So, Sebastian, how about you?
Yeah, I really like that you are talking about imagining the future in ways that are kind of really interesting for students. So how can they see themselves using AI in new and innovative ways to help and to improve society in the future? I think that was really interesting, but definitely related to what Kim said about social media influencers. That is a big one that a lot of my students have often said they want to be, and I think that's just because they've been steeped in social media since birth, really. And so I try to balance that out with, some of the underlying, not only just pitfalls, but some of the challenges that a lot of social media influencers might face, things like burnout, the idea that content creation is incredibly hard. It requires a lot of work. So work ethic, perseverance, persistence, like all of those things are going to be able to be applied to any career that they might choose in the future. I also try to get them to think about, well, having so much consuming so much social media, what does that do to our brains as we grow? And so even recently we've had discussions about, what is an appropriate amount of time to be in front of a screen consuming social media? What does it do to a growing brain? And getting them to see that a lot of these apps are in many ways manipulating their attention and might be actually harming them. And so I think by balancing the conversation is a great way for them to see the future, where they can embrace the technology they're already using, but also know that there are alternatives as well. And then video games is a big one as well. So I think that getting students to think about the gaming industry as an industry, there's so many different roles that you can play, and having those points of entry for students, I think making that explicit is also kind of really important as well.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great. I have just sort of a side question because both of you mentioned the fascination with influencers and YouTubers. We all know our students, want to do this, want to be content creators. But in regards to fame and AI, and I'm particularly curious, around younger students, are they how do you have conversations with them, or have they had, or are they aware of, like deep fakes, or, the sorts of AI that are out there right now imitating and sort of causing negative consequences? I'm just curious if that's come up in any of your classrooms, or if you've heard your students talk about it. Anybody can answer that if it's come up or you've talked about it.
Yeah, so we in my classroom, we definitely have talked about it. We've talked about how there's misinformation, and how probably the easiest way to share that with my elementary students is to use image generation software. And then we look at all the things that are like wrong with it, like look how many fingers they have, or why does that dog have 3 legs and one's coming out the front, and it's like that's the easiest way to help students see that not everything generated by AI is true and accurate, because when they read it, they just want, oh, I read it, it must be true, right? Like when they Google something, it must be true. Well, it's the same when we're using the AI. And so, like I was saying, to me, the easiest way to show them that not everything is believable is to do image generation.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I love that. And there's so many tools out there now too, of course, to do it pretty easily. So that's great. Okay, next question. What AI technologies do you believe will have the greatest impact on shaping career opportunities for students, particularly in technology, technical fields? And how can educators prepare them for these roles? Amanda?
Yeah. Yes. So I feel technology that can increase productivity will have the greatest impact on what careers are available to our students in the future, and change what those careers currently look like. So how they are now will potentially look differently in the future based on AI. I think educators need to be cognizant of how AI is being used in careers now, how they can potentially change the skills needed for those careers. Even if AI can replace the human in the job, somebody's still going to need to verify the work to ensure the output that we get is what was intended for. So there's going to still have to be that human element. It's just the roles in these positions may potentially change. There's going to be jobs that AI simply cannot replace. Our creative positions, writers, artists, educators are still going to be needed, but their role may look a little bit different, maybe as more of a facilitator versus a leader of the education. But new ideas and content's always going to have to be created for AI to draw from. Um, Otherwise, it's just going to be limited to what we already have. AI can also make work easier, so it can do that end, like we do all the research, but it can do the analyzing of the data, the creating of the presentation, where more time can be spent on the actual work needing to be done versus kind of those minutia of creating the presentations.
Yeah. I know a lot of us are definitely have been looking at and digging into those productivity and efficiency tools where we can, for sure. Sebastian, how about you?
I completely agree with what Amanda mentioned, in that things that administratively have been traditionally done by people, those jobs are going to be impacted, and had already being impacted by AI quite heavily. And I also think that even the creative fields, I have friends who work in video game design, and they have mentioned just the impact of um, image generation, and now video generation has really disrupted what they're doing. And I think, again, if we are able to provide students with tools to know how to identify not just the pitfalls, but also some of the amazing things that can be done with these tools. So even getting them to think, traditional storytelling, a lot of times that means that marginalized people haven't been able to share their stories. So this could provide an opportunity for people that have not been able to tell their life story, or to share their perspectives, to be engaged in things like the film industry or video game design. Um, And I think for technical fields, I think it's important for students to understand that AI is going to be used in all sorts of fields that they may not even think of, like in law, um, uh, in the environment, like in the environmental sector has an enormous amount of applications for AI for gathering data, modeling. So again, I think it's like getting students to see how these fields can be interconnected with each other, and showing them how AI can actually pull these connections together, I think is really important. And so that they can see themselves, regardless of what industry they're going to work in the future, that it can be enhanced with these AI tools that we're already using right now.
Yeah, I like that enhancement. Also curious, and I don't know, you may not have the answer to this, but love that you have folks in video game design to talk to. Not sure if you ever get to bring them into your classroom. That would be amazing if you did. But you mentioned, that they mentioned the disruption.
Imagine worlds in video games. So I think it's definitely something that is it's pushing people to understand that they have to embrace it, and that it can in many ways help to eliminate some of that like work that is more tedious, and getting them to expand what they can do and their capabilities. But it is definitely something that has been pushing them in that direction for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so how do you think AI can enhance personalized learning experiences for students pursuing technical education? And what challenges might educators face in implementing AI-powered learning platforms? Kim. Oh, Kim, you're on mute.
Unmuted. No, I am unmuted.
You are
Can
now,
you hear me?
yes. Yes,
Oh,
I can hear you
I
now.
was like, I did unmute. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was saying that we're already starting to see the use of interactive chatbots so that students can provide or can receive those tailored educational content needs being met. So, for example, let's say you have a student that's sitting in your class and I don't have a computer science background, but I have students that by fifth grade, they're already using Python. And I know just a little bit, but not enough that, like, if there were real errors in their syntax, that I could help them. But something like a chat bot, they could easily have a conversation with that chat bot to help them find the bug and fix the bug. And then, like, I think that chatbots also, or even large language models, they allow students to be able to talk with historical characters or talk with famous people about different topics. And what that does is it increases student interest and engagement, so that the students, instead of just reading a piece of paper or even just reading something on the screen, they're having that back and forth sort of naturalized conversation with that character. As far as challenges that we face, there's a lot. Integration, training, equity, ethics all come to mind. So, for example, when a teacher wants to implement AI, first they need to pick something that's going to match up with their traditional teaching methods and the curriculum that they already have. And also, it has to be something that is, especially if they're working within a school district, it needs to be, follow the parameters of the guidelines of that school district. And you can't just say to an educator, look, here's a new tool, now go use it in your classroom. we have to provide training to educators on how to use these tools. When are they appropriate? Because they're not all appropriate, and they shouldn't be in every situation, in every classroom. And we also have to train educators on how to look at the data that's provided by these tools in order to maximize the use of the tool. I think equity is a huge issue. You'll have one teacher over here that's saying, yes, of course you can use AI in my class. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the pitfalls. And then over here you have another educator that's saying, absolutely not. You may not use AI in my class. And they may be teaching the same subject at the same school. And then that's an issue, because you've got one group of students that's now disadvantaged when compared to the other group of students. And that happens not just within the same school, but also across school districts as well. So when you don't allow students access to use AI in some situations and you do in others, then you're creating a digital divide. And I mean, to me, it's almost like if I had students in AP Calculus and I told this class they could use calculators, and this class you can't use calculators, you know? And then finally, for me personally, because of the age group of students that I teach, I'm always concerned about the privacy, because most AI is not for students 13 and under. And a lot of the apps that we already have in our district now have AI built into them. And so I'm always, you know, hesitant to make sure that the AI is appropriate for my age students, and how I'm using it is appropriate for my students.
Yeah, those are all excellent points. There's so many opportunities and so many advantages that AI can bring, but we've also brought in this wealth of just how do we do this? What do we do here? And, need for policy and guidelines. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. Sebastian, how about you? Same question.
I completely agree about what Kim mentions about creating a digital divide if tools aren't equitably distributed, or if I think that's one of the challenges that as a teaching team we might all face is, some teachers are doing more traditional types of learning and teaching, which are great, but if those students aren't building those digital literacies, what are they missing, and how are they going to be able to catch up? And it's like, what are they losing by not being engaged in AI and some of the tools that we might be more proficient in, or just more open to exploring. But I also am very adamant about privacy as well. So for AI tools, I very much, in many ways, use my personal email for a lot of the tools that I use, because they're not board approved, or not yet board approved, or ones that are might not be doing the thing that I want it to do. So I think you have to be very careful, and especially when it comes to student data and information. How do we protect students' information? How do we protect their data? And I think we just have to explicitly teach them these skills about cybersecurity, cyber safety, online presence. I think that is so fundamental and important, and students will understand very quickly that it can be a very uneasy place being online if you don't protect yourself. So I think that is another layer to all of this is protecting students' privacy.
Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of ask a follow-up question here, because you both mentioned privacy, and I think all educators are, in the same boat with that feeling that we wanna protect our students' data. So when you are looking at different AI tools that you possibly want to use in your classroom, where do you, like, personally go? What are you looking for? Like, do you read the full terms of service, or do you like, what's your strategy for sort of like looking at one of these tools and deciding that you might use it? And how do you find that information about student privacy and data? Anyone can answer that.
It's kind of funny that you mentioned that about the terms of service, because that is something that I was going to talk about a little later. But that's exactly what I think companies need to be 100% transparent with us as educators. Like we cannot go read 8-page terms of service to make sure that you're not violating the data policy for our district or for our school or wherever we are. And so for me personally, my students are not using AI unless it's integrated in an app that we've already have access to, and it says right there on the screen, this, you can use this and this is why. And so I don't take them outside of anything that's already known to me. So yeah.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, and I look forward to hearing whatever you have to say later too about when we talk about terms of service. All right, so back on the sort of talking about career pathways, and we talked about this a little bit because I asked you a question about the video game design, but we hear about AI potentially displacing jobs, especially in certain industries. So, how do you think educators can address these concerns, and what strategies might you implement to help your students adapt to changing workforce demands? Manda, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think educators in like our CTE programs need to be aware of how their industry can potentially change with the advancements in technology and AI. They can adjust the skills in their programs to better prepare students for those changes in that industry. There's always going to be a need for that human element, like I mentioned before, to make sure that the processes are working in the way that they should, as well as the end product coming out in the way that it was intended to. We also need to prepare students for a work environment that uses AI, just like we made this shift from or to incorporating STEM into education. We can have, as we've shifted to a more technology-based society, so how to effectively use and evaluate that end product of using AI needs to be taught, I think, just like any other skill rooted in technology.
Yeah, I like that. I like the use and evaluation. It's very important. How about you, Sebastian?
I think history is a really great way for your students to see that technology has always disrupted jobs. Technology has always displaced workers or changed the way people work. And I think by exploring the past, we can also empower students to see that people persevered, whether it be the Industrial Revolution. Automation has been a huge disruptor for since the Industrial Revolution, and new jobs are always created. And the creative field, in some ways, has been enhanced by these disruptions. So I think it's important to look in the past to see how it relates to our present is really important. I also think that it can help students imagine, well, if some of these jobs are no longer available, what else can people do? What are the opportunities that people have if these jobs go away? And like Kim mentioned early on, could we be like thinking really creatively about the future in an optimistic way? How can we work with these tools and do things that it's just not possible to do now? And what sorts of breakthroughs can that bring? So I think bringing a sense of optimism to kind of balance out some of the fears that I guess are going to persist with AI is going to be one of those ways that we can kind of help students to use their imagination to think of a more hopeful future and embrace AI and just see that technology does disrupt work, and it always has.
I love that. I love the history, being able to go back and teach those history lessons about technology, and just what a great like way to integrate that those stories. Um, so talking again about the workplace, what strategies or tools are you using to help develop critical thinking and adaptability skills that are still needed in the workplace? Kim, I'll start with you.
All right. So I use a lot of project-based learning in my classroom, which promotes active participation, real world problem solving. The students have to collaborate. There's creativity. There's a sense of communication, and I find that when we're going through the process, one of the important things that we talk about is failure. And a lot of students just have in their mind that, like, if I tried it and it didn't work, I failed, oh well, I'm done. And we talk about how that's not really what the design process is, and that we have to be more resilient than that. We have to know that we might try something several times. We might try to create a product or solve a problem, and we might never get to the solution. But that doesn't mean that we give up. We have to keep trying. In particular, where this comes to mind in my class, I would say I have a unit where we learn about gardening. And so we actually learn all about pollinators and soil and, all the different things that go along with gardening in a technical sense. But then the students actually go out and they have to figure out which seeds are the best ones for me to choose for this location, which is full sun versus partial shade, and how deep do I have to bury these seeds so that they'll actually sprout, and how long is it going to take until I can see the literal fruits of my labor. And so all of this leads the students to using those critical thinking skills, but also knowing that even when things aren't necessarily going their way, that they can't give up, that they have to adapt and keep trying until they get the results that they're looking for.
Excellent. I'm a big fan of gardening in schools. I think it's there's so many lessons that you can teach there in that one. So, Manda, how about you?
For me, I think soft skills, like we've mentioned, are always going to be needed for students to learn to be successful employees. And an element of work that AI technology can never replace. Like, you have to have those emotions and those communication skills, the personal element to it. I work with my students to learn for them to help themselves first. Like, what resources do you have available to you before I help you? So what resources do you have to find the answer that you're looking for? How can you do that? How can you solve a problem on your own before you're just handed the answer? How will you know you were successful? So being able to evaluate your end results that in your searches, did you find the answer that you were actually looking for? So going back to those communication skills that are so vital, or even collaboration. Go ask a friend, does somebody in the class have the expertise? In my classroom, I even have an experts board that students that feel like they can be successful in helping a classmate in whatever the activity is we're doing, regardless if it's one of my technology classes or my career and life planning class, they go put their name up on the experts board so a student can go and ask a classmate that's the expert to help them as one of their resources. And also with my computer foundation students, we look at evaluating their sources of information through their digital citizenship skills to kind of evaluate, is the information that you're engaging with or the person you're engaging with legitimate? Is it a real source? Is it the information valid? And how to kind of evaluate that resource online.
No, I think those are all great, great tips. I'm curious. I'm going to ask you kind of both. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper. When we talk about critical thinking, we talk about adaptability. I love project-based learning, and I kind of heard also, Manda, the way you were talking about, students will come to you and they want to know how to do it, but we kind of place that ownership back on them. Well, how do you think you do it, and how do you solve it? But depending on the age group, I have worked also with like kindergarten through high school. I primarily worked with middle school, and I do find differences in like the ages and their responses to that sort of like needing to adapt. And what are, your students, how did they respond to that? And in particular, if you have any who get discouraged, so like, for example, like when we talk about design thinking and project-based learning, I would have students building something and just wasn't working for them. So like, how do you encourage them, or what is it that you say to them, like to, you know, encourage and empower that critical thinking and that adaptability?
So I have a sign in my room that says, I failed today, and that's okay. And I point it out at the beginning of our
is younger than Manda's, but it's the exact same approach. Like if they have a question, they usually start with a neighbor sitting at the table and ask them first, for help. And I'm talking all the way down to kindergarten, first grade. That's how we're training them. It's like the teacher is not your first resource. There's 25 of you and one of me. I don't want you standing here for 15 minutes waiting for me to get to you when the kid sitting next to you really knows how to do it. I also have in my classroom the policy of just push the button. Like you can't, whatever you do, like, because we use the computers frequently, the coding robots and things, just push the button. If something happens, we'll figure it out. You're not going to break it, So, and I even say that when I'm training teachers who are they're hesitant to touch things and press things and do things, just push the button. We'll figure it out. And then I have a very similar poster in my room, but it's fail spelled out, and it just says frequent attempts in learning. And so my students just know, like, you can do it again. It didn't work that time, we'll try again. We'll try something different. Let's talk about it. What worked, what didn't work. We do a lot of self-evaluations at the end of our projects, and also when we're doing STEM in the room. So if they're building something, at the end they write like, this worked, this was perfect, this didn't work, this is why it didn't work, this is what I would do differently next time, these are the new materials I would use. So we have that process where we think about the whole thing, not just like, okay, we're done, here's my product. So yeah, we're talking about it the whole time.
That's wonderful. So we have a couple more questions, and then we're going to hop into some questions from the audience. But our next question: what are your greatest hopes regarding the integration of AI into education and its potential to create new career pathways for students, particularly those who have been historically and systematically excluded? Kim, I'm going to start with you again.
So my primary concern here is that students who've been historically and systemically excluded, we have to understand why this is happening. And starting with AI is probably not where we need to start, because there's obviously some sort of digital divide, whether it's a lack of resources, whether that school's underfunded. We've got to get to the issue of the problem and get that resolved before we start introducing them to AI. I mean, if you think about it, a kid that doesn't even have a computer or Wi-Fi access at home, what good are we doing? Starting with AI. Do I think AI is important? Absolutely. Once we've leveled the playing field for those students. So for me, I see this being really helpful for English language learners, because AI can offer translation options. It can offer customized lessons for those students. It can offer interactive practice based on what their current proficiency level is, and then provide them feedback and suggestions for improving their grammar and their vocabulary. I also think that AI can help with accessibility, because you have options like speech dictate, speech recognition, and other adaptive technologies as well. One instance that comes to mind when I think about AI, and equity or lack of equity is when I think about high school seniors writing college essays, and I think about the haves and the have-nots. The students who have been exposed to AI and have been taught how to use AI ethically, and are allowed to use that to help write their college applications, may potentially have an advantage over the students who didn't have access to AI. And so I think in that sense, we really need to get to the point where we're giving that access to all students, so that it could possibly increase their chances of getting into their top choice schools, and opening up more scholarship opportunities for them when they have to write an essay in order to earn a specific scholarship. But I think that there's a lot that has to be done before we can even maybe get to that level.
Yeah, for sure. Amanda, how about you?
My answer is actually pretty similar. I feel AI does open up access to education that students have not always had in the past. With the tutoring that could be available through AI, students who couldn't access extra help with their schoolwork now have better opportunities to do so now. If they do have that access to Wi-Fi at home after school hours, but maybe their parents are third shift workers, you don't have access to your teacher, then you have this other opportunity to get the help that you need to be successful through the technologies. I think it gives students and employees better access to completing work, again, through, like Kim said, the speech to text opportunities. And I saw a new technology come out the other day that you can research an object and you can put it into the generator and it'll tell you what the object is and what it's used for. So I see that kind of with the helping students understand things better about their world, looking at those historical artifacts that we may not have easy access to records on. I also think it can help adapt. AI can help students adapt their learning to either make it more challenging if whatever they're inputting appears to be too easy for them, or draw it back down and maybe give them examples if it's too hard for them, and kind of have that shift back and forth. I think that there's going to be but there's always going to have to be careers to create these technologies, and the human interaction to make sure that the algorithms are creating those appropriate outcomes are going to be needed. So again, we're going to have this shift in careers. The industries maybe not totally go away, but they will change how we interact with the processes.
Yeah, for sure. I've got one more question, but I also have a couple of questions from the audience. So I'm gonna ask the questions from the audience. If we have time, I'll get to this last question, but I want to ask these because they did come from our audience. So our first question from the audience: what are best practices for educators on how to vet and integrate AI tools in the classroom that help learners to think and acquire future-oriented skills? Best practices on vetting and integrating AI tools that might help learners think and acquire future-oriented skills. And any of you can answer that.
Well, I think if you're, as an educator, if you're going to take on the responsibility of vetting these different tools, then you need to be aware of COPPA and FERPA to make sure that you are legally and ethically within the parameters of what your students should and should not have access to. I feel strongly that a lot of it should be done at the district level. There should be mandates and policies put in place, not only to protect the student, but also to protect the teacher, because there are going to be teachers out there that have no idea, and they're going to see this flash in the pan AI and say, oh, that would be great. And they just are going to start using it with their students, whether or not it's appropriate and relevant to be used with those students. So I don't know if that answered the question.
It did. I think it did. I think it did great. I love that you mentioned COPA and FERPA and policy. That was actually part of our last question, so I might be able to get to it. But I'm going to ask the next audience question, which is simply, how do you stay ahead of the curve when it comes to how AI may impact future careers?
I think you have to do the research. Just be aware of what's out there. I've done just Google searches of AI and future careers. What's it going to look like? How is it going to shift careers? And just kind of be cognizant of what's coming and what those shifts could be, but also don't be afraid of it. You know, whenever computers first came out, everybody had the big, oh my gosh, our learning is just going to go down the tubes. But we adapted, we've made the shifts. And for both this and the previous question, technology has to be used for a purpose. So we want to make sure that it's meeting the needs of its intended purpose and not just being used to be used.
No, I think that's great. So we do have like about 4 minutes, and I'm kind of curious for each of your opinion on this next question that I'm going to ask this last question. So just keeping that in mind. We talked about policy. You mentioned it already once, Kim. So looking ahead, what sorts of initiatives or policies, what do you think that needs to be in them? Do you think are necessary to ensure that AI is used responsibly in education and that students are adequately prepared for the AI driven careers in the future? And Sebastian, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I definitely think regulation and more importantly, government regulation could be a great tool to provide teachers with um, learning that they can take into the classroom. So at the federal level, the provincial level, the municipal level, if there is regulation, if there is learning that we can take from that to engage students in some of the impacts that AI is going to have, I think that's a great starting point. I also think that it's really important for teachers to continuously engage with professional development and to continue to learn about technology and how it's disrupting and how it's impacting education. And then finally, I think it's both what Kim and Amanda said. It's really important that we get guidance from the district level because there's a lot of tools out there, and we don't need to show the students all of the things. We can start with a few, and they can grow from there. I think is really important as well.
Very well said. Kim, what would you like to add?
Well, I mean, I agree with Sebastian. What he just said. Definitely, the professional development is going to be a huge piece. Unfortunately, what we see so many times is the teachers are either just told, "Here's an app you can use," or maybe they attend a training, but it's like a one-day training, and then there's no follow-up for how it's being used or is it effective, and I think that that's one of the biggest issues that we're seeing right now, or at least I'm seeing, is that there's just a lack of teacher training to how to use the tools. So it's not that the teachers don't want to, it's that they don't know how to.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great point. And finally, Manda.
I think what we've got to really look forward to, in addition to what's already been said, is biases, that we need to be looking out for accuracy of the information generated and be aware of, are we making sure that marginalized people are not continue to be marginalized? Additionally, we also need to be looking at how to give credit to the original creators of the content. I feel like that's kind of been maybe left out of, yeah, I generated all of these great pieces to this fantastic image, but it was drawn from an original creator somewhere. So I think that needs to be addressed as well.
Oh, those are really, really good. All of these have been just a fantastic conversation. Thank you all. Thank you so much for just an engaging and wonderful conversation tonight. And that brings us to our wrap up. So thank you, audience, for being here, for listening and engaging, for contributing questions. You can find all of our panelists on LinkedIn and Twitter/X. We will be dropping those links into the chat for you to please follow them, connect with them. They would love to chat with you about what's going on in their classroom. All of them are active on socials and posting wonderful things about what they are doing in their classroom. We have one more spring LinkedIn Live that is coming up on Wednesday, April 17th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Playfulness, gamification, and accessibility. Looking forward to that one. Also, we have a recent EdSurge publication, Playful Pedagogy, Gamer Types, and Board Games for Inclusive Learning. And that was co authored by our Digital Promise team as well as two of our HP Teaching Fellows. So I believe hopefully the team is dropping that link in the chat as well. It's a fantastic publication for you to go check out. And then last but not least, a big thank you to our funders and our Reinvent the Classroom initiative. You can learn more by visiting our website, digitalpromise.org /initiative/reinvent the classroom. And our team will be dropping that as well. So yeah, I gave myself 5 minutes to do this wrap up, and somehow every single time I do it in like 1 or 2. So I could let you all do more talking and more questions next time. But yes, we are at the end of our evening. Not sure which coast you're on, but it's late here for us on the East Coast. Most of us on this call are on the East Coast. But again, thank you so much for joining us. We had a wonderful time, and we will see you all next time. Bye.